Such a joy to be with you. Since I'm meeting so many of you for the very, very first time, I'd love to just take a couple minutes to share with you a bit of my story, because hopefully that'll breathe some dimension into the words that I'll be offering this weekend. I spent the first chunk of my life as a sincere and certain atheist, absolutely convinced that there was no God. Seemed extremely clear to me that God hadn't created humankind, that humankind had created God, because there were just so many questions in life that were never going to be answered by science, by reason, by experience. So it was understandable that individuals and entire cultures would create mythical beings, call him God, call them gods, stuff them in the gaps, calm your fears. As a young atheist, I simply considered myself a fierce realist who preferred unanswered questions over fairy tales. But then God, the God who pursues even those who deny him, interrupted my atheistic existence with an encounter so incredibly tangible that I would have had to commit intellectual and emotional suicide to deny God's reality. Fast forward 4 decades, and today, by God's grace, I find myself married to an extraordinary man of God, Dr. Barry J. Sholey. He is my dearest friend and my wisest mentor. God has blessed our love through the miracle of adoption with 3 wonderful, wonderful children. They are now 26, 20, and 17. And they all have had journeys of their own with autism and cocaine and meth exposure in utero. They are wonderful, wonderful souls. And my days are mostly spent with wonderful folks like you. My calling is to come alongside of women and help them develop intimacy with God that is sustainable, intimacy with God that does not rise and fall based on the temperature of our emotions or our circumstances. And so it is a joy to be with you. Now we're going to begin what I hope will feel less like a lecture and more like a retreat by looking at the verse that birthed the theme that I'll be sharing on this weekend, and that is from 3 John. Now, scholarly consensus is that John wrote this short letter of 14 verses around 85 to 90 AD, and the letter is addressed to a man named Gaius. Now, every once in a while, you come across a name, and it's been repeated before, which is absolutely so fun when you love to study the Bible. Gaius's name actually occurs 5 times in the New Testament. We first meet him in Acts 19, verse 29, when he and another man, also from Macedonia, were Paul's traveling buddies. And so he traveled with Paul, he journeyed with Paul, through some pretty difficult spaces and places like riots in Ephesus. We also see his name just a few verses later in Acts chapter 20, verse 4, where he is listed with a small band of brothers, including Timothy, which is another familiar name. Next occurrence is Romans chapter 16, verse 23, where Paul is sending the church in Rome a personal greeting. He sends them a personal greeting from Gaius. And then he affirms Gaius. He says, Gaius, whose hospitality I and the whole church here enjoy. We learn a little bit more in the 4th occurrence, 1 Corinthians 1:14, when Paul mentioned that he personally baptized Gaius, which brings us to the 5th mention in 3 John 1. So I want you to see this man. I want you to activate your God-given imagination and see him, a Macedonian whom Paul personally baptized, who was like a spiritual son to Paul, much like Timothy was. Paul's traveling companion, who shared his hardships, a learner who became a leader, whose hospitality and whose love were legendary, and whose beloved mentor, Paul, had passed away around 2 decades, at least 2 decades before this letter was written. Gaius had lost his mentor. And so in 3 John, we see John stepping in. 3 John starting, verse 1 and 2. The elder, to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. A prayer, a blessing, if you would, and a very, very specific one. There's a bit of repetition, both in the English, reflective of what's in the Greek. May go well and is getting along well are translated from the same Greek word, just different variations. It has a meaning of prospering, enjoying good health. That phrase is translated from one Greek word. It's an idiom, the state of being healthy, of being sound, of being well, of gaining, of becoming complete. So if you'll allow a paraphrase, John says this: my dear friend, my prayer for you is that you are sound. My prayer for you is that you are well, that all in your life is prospering as your soul is prospering. A prosperous soul, a well soul. Out of all the things in all the world that John could have said to this dear man, he prayed a blessing over him of a well, of a healthy soul. Hence my theme. Encouragements toward a truly healthy soul. Encouragements toward a truly healthy soul. Now, my hope is, during our 3 sessions together, to share with you 6 such encouragements, and each one builds on the other. And then in each session, another hope I have is to share with you one of my favorite personal disciplines to behold God in my daily life. So I have 3 asks for our sessions together from you. The first is this: I want to ask you, as you're listening, to listen as his daughter, to listen as God's child, to not listen from whatever your position or your title or your job or your role or the 5 different hats you wore before 8 a.m. this morning. I really would like you to listen as just God's girl, just his daughter. Second ask, I would like you to listen not just to pass it on to somebody else. I would like you to listen for you. We spend so much time, don't we, receiving something, barely even tasting it before we pass it on to somebody else. No wonder we're so thirsty. So I'd like you, when God passes you this cup during this weekend, I'd like you to drink it for you. This retreat has been absolutely designed to water your soul. And if by chance Jesus returns at our final amen before we've had a chance to tweet it or post it or send it to that person that really should have been here, if you haven't had a chance to pass it on yet, Jesus is not going to wave his hand over this weekend and say, oh, well, that was a waste. Because this weekend is for you. Listen for yourself. And the third ask, Jen already alluded to earlier, I want you to pay attention to when you feel distracted. Because there's a teacher in there. And when you feel distracted, don't beat yourself up. Just ask yourself, I wonder why. And it may be as simple as, I've been sitting way too long. But it may be also that you might be squirming a bit about something. And that's where the teacher can be. That's where God can teach us even in times of distraction. So today, right now, I'm actually going to front load one of my favorite spiritual disciplines before I even begin to teach further, all right? I would like you to take just a couple of seconds and get in touch with what's distracting you. And it may be, oh, I knew I needed to get one more pizza before I left, or I have to remember to get gas in the car on the way back, or I don't know what it is. I don't know what's distracting you, but you do. And so let's just be honest about it, shall we? So quietly there, in God's presence, say, God, this is the list that's distracting me right now. Just in your seats. Okay? All right, so here it is, one of my favorite personal disciplines. I don't have like a official thing to call it, so I'm just going to refer to it as peripheral vision prayer. All right? Peripheral vision prayer. Now, where is your peripheral vision? Let's go ahead, everybody put your hands where your peripheral vision is, right? We know, it's right around here. Where we can see it, but we're not focused on it, right? In peripheral vision prayer, all that means to me is these things that are distracting me, I'm incredibly honest with God about them, and then I put them in my peripheral vision spiritually. Because if I put them here, that would be called hyperfocus, wouldn't it? It's all I see. It's all I'm concentrating on. I can't pay attention to anything else. I don't want it here front and center. But I also don't want it back here. You know what I would call it back here? Denial. I'm not distracted. Nope, 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 no, me, not me. I am not squirrel. This would be denial. This would be hyperfocus. This is peripheral vision. And so this is where I say, Lord, these are the things that are distracting me. I set them in your presence, and I'm going to focus upon you. I'm going to focus upon your word. I'm going to focus upon your character. And I do that through an extremely simple and short prayer. It goes like this. Lord, you know, because he does. He knows. Me keeping it in my mind doesn't help him keep it in his. Me going over it and over it and over it doesn't grant him more clarity. And so you ready? Simple spiritual discipline. If you want, you can do it physically with your hands. If not, use your imagination. Ready? Grab those distractions. Put them in your peripheral vision. Simple prayer. Think of Jesus. Let's all say it together. Lord, you know. And then just once more. Lord, you know. Amen. Feel free to do that around 100 times if you need to. It helps me so much in concentrating. All right, now before diving into the very, very first encouragement. Yeah, you guys signed up for that, right? I have come to bring you 6 discouragements. The book will be available afterwards. The first encouragement, since our theme is encouragements toward a healthy soul, we're actually going to start at the end and try to expend a little bit of energy wrapping our minds around the concept of a soul. So, what is your working definition of a soul? We're pursuing it being healthy. Might be good for us to make sure we know what it is. What is your working definition of a soul? How would you describe it? Where would you locate it? And for those of you who may have been theologically affected, you have read a bazillion books, you've been to Bible college or to seminary, I need to emphasize what I am not asking you right now. I am not asking you to make a case for whether we are bipartite or tripartite. I am not asking you to finesse a distinction between duality and dualism or deification and divinization. I am not asking you to address the ancient but always newly repackaged foe of Gnosticism. I just want you to answer the question. What and where is your soul? Answer it as though you were answering a 5-year-old. 5-year-old comes up to you and says, Auntie, what and where is your soul? Are you ready? Around 2 minutes of discussion, go. All right. So how many, when you were asked to point to where your soul would be by that 5-year-old, how many of you would instinctively point to your head? Anyone? This is a moment for group interaction, yes? How many would point to your head? Anybody? No? Okay. Heart? Okay. Anybody point to your gut, your splachnoy? Yep. Okay. Today, we use the word soul to describe personhood. Yes? We speak of a generous soul, a kind soul. We speak of soul friends. We speak of soulmates. And thankfully, this is going to be wonderfully helpful. This is very, very similar to how the word is used in the scriptures. Now, to me, Bible translators are some of the most brilliant people on the planet. Not only do they have to reach back in ancient languages and have a grasp on how language is used within the scripture and outside of the scripture, then they have to reach forward to a modern language that's still in motion and try to match up ideas and concepts that reflect the original intention and the original meaning. So I am reading, obviously, an English translation, and that was created by a bunch of brilliant Bible translators. So when we see the word soul in an English translation of the Bible, that word soul is, and this is hardly a word I get to use, always translated from one Hebrew word, nephesh, and one Greek word, psyche. But it looks like psyche, so we're going to go with psyche, all right? Every time you see the word soul, it's translated directly from one Hebrew word and one Greek word. Here's the fun thing, though. That one Hebrew word, it appears a whole lot more times, and only 14% of the time is it translated soul. That one Greek word, it appears over 100 times, but only 25% of the time is it translated soul. And so when we look at those words and we examine them in different contexts, when these brilliant people weren't translating those words as soul, how were they translating them? Here we go. Here's the collection. Life, heart, everyone, minds, all, lives, person, you, appetite, creatures, spirit, body, desire, needs, hunger, depending on the context. Well, that's messy, isn't it? Not terribly Western at all, but evidently in the cultures in which these books were originally written to, the lines between body, soul, and spirit weren't as crisp. So at first, when I looked at this collection of words, at first it appeared that that collage was confusing, but I'd like to suggest that it's actually more clarifying, because your soul defies dissection, doesn't it? Our souls are corrupted and corroded by compartmentalization, by these efforts to keep our heads away from our hearts, not the best recipe for health. So what makes you, you, is not that you have a head, and not that you have a heart, and not that you have a body. What makes you, you, is the glorious song that's released from the choir of all of your thinking and feeling and being and doing. You release a unique song. Your song has a unique signature in all of history because you are gloriously covered with a custom set of God's fingerprints. In other words, He custom sourced you. He custom sourced you. I mentioned that I have 3 children through the miracle of adoption, and their origin stories are rather difficult. And so it was really important for my husband and I that we gave them a theological framework for their existence. So ever since they were tiny, we would be having conversations with them that sounded something like this. Sweetheart, do you know what it takes for you to come into this world? It takes 2 sets of choices. There are humans that make a choice together, but there's another choice that has to be made too. And this is true, isn't it? The fact that 2 people make a choice, and we know that choices aren't always on both sides, but the fact that 2 people make a choice does not a baby make, does it? Ask anyone who has struggled with infertility. Choice alone cannot create a child. So these 2 people make a choice, yes, but then somebody else had to make a choice too. God had to breathe. And when He breathes, a custom designed soul comes into existence. So you exist by divine design. You exist, your soul exists by divine breath. Now, my eldest on the autistic spectrum, he processed this for a while, and I think it was probably in his teenage years. He started putting some of the pieces together of his origin story. And he came to me one day with like tears in his eyes, and he said, Mom, I've been thinking about my story. He said, Mom, am I alive because someone sinned? And I said, oh, babe, do you remember the story we've told you ever since you were little? No. The reason you're alive is not because someone sinned. Sin can't create life. No, you're alive because God chose to breathe. You're alive by divine design. So in this room, whatever your origin story, in this room, regardless of how you were greeted at birth, in this room, regardless of whether you felt wanted or welcomed growing up. The fact is that you exist by divine breath. God breathed because he wanted you. He breathed you into existence. Now, why sometimes that breath that God gives lasts weeks or over 100 years is a mystery that's well beyond us. But I want you to hear that your life releases a unique song, that you exist by divine design. So anytime we talk about the soul, we are walking right into the middle of sacred mystery. Because the fact is, you are more than matter. You are simultaneously God's art. Psalm 139, verse 14, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. You are God's art. And you are also God's dwelling place. As Jesus said in John 14:20, I am in the Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. So psychologically, the soul is the self. Theologically, the soul is your innermost being. And perhaps the most useful definition of the soul is personhood. So all who live have a soul. All who live have a soul. The question before us is whether or not our soul is growing in health, which brings us to the first encouragement. Encouragement number 1, toward our desire to have healthy souls. Make sure that your definition of healthy is healthy. Make sure that your definition of healthy is healthy, beginning with the word. The words health, healthy, healthier appear just under 20 times throughout the scriptures, translated from 6 Hebrew words, 2 Greek words. When we do that study, we see that these words carry a sense in the Old Testament of soundness of body, fatness of crops, strength of livestock. In the New Testament, these words carry the meaning of able, strong, sound, and well. In Matthew 9:12, Jesus said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. And then 3 John 1:2, dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health. The study was loads of fun. Whenever I'm done with the study in the scripture, then I overlay it with etymology. I overlay it with the story, the history of the English word that I'm focusing on. So if you would let me just geek out just a little bit, it won't take too long. Give me about 2 minutes to talk about the etymology of the word healthy. The word health is derived from the Old High German Heil, which means whole. And its first known appearance in the English language was in the year 1000. First time we know of that the word healthy appears in the English language, in 1000 by a Benedictine monk in a Christmas sermon. And so when I tracked that down in a language that I could read, because I do not read Old English, I was stunned. Because the very first time the word healthy appears in the English language, it appears as an adjective for the word soul. Listen to this. Highly esteemed scholar. He says, the Son of God was crowded in his inn, that he might give us a spacious dwelling in the kingdom of heaven if we obey his will. He asks nothing of us as reward for his toil except our soul's health, that we may prepare ourselves for him pure and uncorrupted in bliss and everlasting joy. Now, this wonderful spiritual leader, his name was Alfric of Eynsham, and I just like to say his name, Alfric of Eynsham. So Alfric takes this brand new word healthy, and he pairs it with one of the most ancient of concepts, the word soul, and then he speaks of that pairing in beautiful and spiritual tones. The first thing that I noticed was that he said, Jesus is looking for a reward for his toil. Interesting. And he wasn't just looking for our soul, he sourced that, right? What he was looking for as a reward for his toil was our souls to be healthy. Have you ever thought of attending to the health of your soul as a way of saying thank you for Jesus' sacrifice? Have you ever thought of nurturing the health of your soul as a way of saying thank you to the soul giver? That's what Alfred of Eynsham is saying here. He takes taking care of our soul out of the realm of a spiritualized form of narcissism, and he puts it right in the middle of intimacy with God and gratitude. He says Jesus is looking for a reward for what he's done. Oh, and here's what you can give him: your soul's health. Fascinating. But it also makes sense. Let's say that you had the ability to give two people cars. And so you gave a car to Joe, and you gave a car to Ralph, and they were thrilled. They were happy. They were blessed. And then one day you happen to have the opportunity to go visit both of them. And so you pull in to visit Joe. The car is there in the driveway. And I mean, it's been ridden for a while. It's had a couple of months, on it, and it's got some dust. There's a couple of crushed Cheerios in the back. But it's been really well maintained. You can tell that Joe's really trying to take care of the vehicle. You didn't come to see the vehicle, you came to see Joe, but you go see Joe. And then a little later on, you go and you see Ralph, and the car that you gave Ralph is in the driveway as well. And wow, has it been through it. I mean, he must have backed into absolutely everything that he could possibly find, and it's just a mess, and it's a disaster. It is rough, not just normal wear and tear. I mean, it has been through it. Now, without Joe or without Ralph ever saying a thing, because you're obviously not going to take any gift back, right? It's irrevocable. But whom would you naturally feel a bit more gratitude from? Now, I'm talking about our souls here. So we're Joe and we're Ralph. It's not a car, it's our soul. God has given you life. A wonderful, unique song to sing. He has breathed you into existence. And so taking care of that mysterious, soulish part of us is simply how we can say thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for all that you've done. And then, just in case they were confused and they didn't know what a healthy soul was, Alfred, in his Christmas sermon, explains it. What is a healthy soul? He says a healthy soul is one that is preparing itself for Jesus. Wow. Preparing itself for Jesus. So how do I help my soul become more healthy? Well, I think in terms of preparing myself for Jesus. So a healthy soul is a mind that thinks with God. A healthy soul is heart and emotions that are gratefully occupied by God. A healthy soul is a will that acknowledges and honors the residency of God. A healthy soul is a being that knows that one day, mysteriously, we're going to somehow be a part of the bride of Christ. But it may take a little while for us to begin to recalibrate our definition of healthy to Alfred of Eynsham's as it pertains to our soul, because we have been more than a little influenced by a culture that defines healthy differently, even spiritual health differently. Because I think that if we were to do a poll among the churches in the United States, and we were to ask something specific like, what do you think a healthy leader looks like? What does a healthy leader do? What are they like? I think that the kind of answers we would receive are things like, well, a healthy leader, man, they've found a way to always be positive, to see the cup as half full, not half empty. They somehow have managed to have no stress. They are pain-free. They seem calm. They're visibly fruitful. They're happy. We would get these adjectives that we associate with healthy because of the culture in which we live and the social media in which we're saturated. And so in light of that influence, I just want to point out that Jesus was not always positive or optimistic. Jesus was definitely not always pain-free, stress-less, calm, happy, or visibly fruitful. Consider his first 30 hidden years. What did he say in Matthew 10:34? I haven't come to bring peace, but a sword. Woo, make a t-shirt. We talk about the promises of God. Here's one, John 16:33. In this world you will have trouble. Woo. So it may take us some time to recalibrate our definition of healthy as regards our souls to make it look more like Jesus. A definition of health that looks more like Jesus. So a simple moment of reflection before I share one more point this evening. Have you ever thought of taking care of your soul as a way of saying thank you to the soul giver? Have you ever thought of taking care of your soul as a way of saying thank you to the soul giver? And then a second thought, too, for your journaling. What might it look like for my soul to be more healthy? Secondly, principle number 2, encouragement number 2. And again, each of these layer. First, encouragement, make sure that your definition of healthy is healthy. Recalibrate it to something that looks a bit more like Jesus. Encouragement number 2, tell yourself the truth. Toward our desire to have healthy souls, absolutely essential. We must tell ourselves the truth. In other words, are you giving yourself permission to develop the discipline of emotional honesty? Are you giving yourself permission to develop the discipline of emotional honesty? Family, I'd like you to turn with me, please, to one of my favorite passages in Matthew chapter 26. And here in Matthew 26, we find Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Contextually, this passage is sandwiched between Jesus predicting Peter's denial and the rest of the disciples' desertion. And immediately after this passage, Judas comes to finalize his betrayal of Jesus, and Jesus is arrested. And what we're going to be looking at toward this encouragement is Matthew chapter 26, verses 37 and 38. Love this passage. So Jesus took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." So I'm going to read this one more time, and I'm going to give you a little bit more flavor for some of the words that God inspired Matthew to record. He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, And he began to be sorrowful, also translated grief, distress, vex, and pain. He began to be sorrowful and troubled, which can also be translated to be anxious or to be distressed. My soul, he said, is overwhelmed with sorrow, which elsewhere is translated deeply grieved. To the point of death, this exact same word appears in Revelation 6:8. There it's translated plague. So Jesus in this passage is describing his soul. He's describing his personhood. He's describing his self. In the adjectives he uses in this space, sorrowful, troubled, overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Now I'm about to ask you a question that ties this encouragement with our first one. Are you ready? So right here in the Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus' self-described soul is troubled, overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, here's my question. Please don't answer it aloud. I just want you to think about it. Do you think that Jesus' soul here was healthy? Do you think that Jesus' soul here was healthy? And it's okay if it makes you a little uncomfortable. Because when I ask this question, not only am I pressing on your working definition of healthy, I'm also pressing on your working definition of holy, aren't I? There in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus describes his soul. Do you think that his soul was healthy? So we say, I want to be like Jesus. So is there room in our definition of being like Jesus to be like Jesus here? Is there room in our definition of being like Jesus to sometimes be sorrowful and troubled and overwhelmed? Because if there's no room in our definition of healthy, if there is no room in our definition of holy for emotional honesty like this, then we will spend a whole lot of energy self-editing because we think there's a whole lot of feelings that people of faith just aren't supposed to have. Jesus was sinless and troubled, which tells me that being troubled is not always a sign of a faith deficit, correct? In this passage, being troubled, being overwhelmed, being sorrowful was evidence of obedience in the making. Have you given yourself permission for the Garden of Gethsemane? I know we keep wanting Garden of Eden Christianity, but we live in a Garden of Gethsemane age. We must wrestle with this. We must wrestle with this level of emotional honesty. This is a critical characteristic of having a healthy soul. Tell yourself the truth. Jesus did. Oh, and he went further. He told other people how he was feeling. And he went even further. When he was inspiring Matthew to record this, he was like, oh, hey, don't leave this out. No, write that down. No, it wasn't just upset. It was overwhelmed. Yeah, overwhelmed slightly. No, that's not what I said. Overwhelmed to the point of death. Right? You got it? Write this down. Jesus was troubled. And notice what he didn't do. He didn't deny it. He didn't dilute it. He didn't dismiss it. He didn't stuff it. He didn't fluff it. He didn't try to outrun it. He gives us this example of fierce, emotional honesty. I want to be like Jesus. I want to be like Jesus. Even, especially, in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus told himself the truth, which was what empowered him to tell his Father the truth. There was a couple staying with us, and they had their little girls with them. And one of them was upset and there to tell what the other one had done. And so she came up in a huff. And the father said, wait. I need you to stop and take a moment and tell yourself the truth before you tell me the truth. Brilliant parenting. I don't know where he was 26 years ago when I was starting this journey. Tell yourself the truth before you open your mouth and tell me the truth. Well, that's what we see happening here. Jesus told himself the truth. And that gave him the strength to release that in prayer to his Father. But in this whole passage, there's a key that we often miss. So Jesus told himself the truth about how he was feeling and about what he felt. And simultaneously, he told the truth about what he believed. Just a few verses later, Matthew 26, verse 42, we read, "My Father, if it's not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." So he told the truth about what he felt. I am overwhelmed with sorrow. I am troubled. And he told himself the truth about what he believed. Let this cup pass, but if it can't, I trust you. I trust you. You're trustworthy. And this is where we err, because Jesus brings these two together, but we generally don't. We tell ourselves the truth about how we feel over here to whoever will listen, or God help us on social media. And then we tell ourselves the truth about what we believe over here, when we have a mic or when we're sharing with other people. No wonder we're so fragmented. We have to bring these two together, telling ourselves the truth about what we feel and what we believe at the same time. Jesus, I feel so anxious about that unexpected medical bill. I'm losing sleep. My heart rate is increased. I have no idea how we're going to do this, and I know that you are my provider. Jesus, this physical hurt, this back thing, I can't seem to breathe. I'm so discouraged. Finally felt like I was gaining some traction. It hurts, and you are near the brokenhearted. God, I messed up so bad again. The shame I feel, it's just crushing me. And I know that your mercies are new every morning. Tell yourself the truth. Key ingredient toward a healthy soul. Tell yourself the truth about what you feel, what you believe, what you don't feel, and what you're not sure you believe anymore. Tell yourself the truth so you can tell the Father the truth. Because, and anybody who has been mentored by me for any length of time has heard me say this 1,000 times. Tell yourself the truth, because honesty about reality is a friend of intimacy with God. Honesty is a friend of intimacy. And maybe you grew up in a culture or in a home that whenever you tried to be honest about your doubts or about your questions, really good-hearted people said something like, "Shh, don't say that about God. It's disrespectful." And I have no doubt that their hearts were in the right place. But as a former atheist, one of the things I really love the most about God is he is not easily offended. All that's happening when we express our questions, when we get honest, is that we're finally getting on his page because he already knows. Oh, friends, so bring your questions with you. Bring your doubts with you. Bring your pains with you. Please bring your honesty with you. If God were an illusion, if God were a fairy tale, yeah, denial would be our friend. But God is the ultimate reality. There is no one, no being more in touch with what is actually happening on this earth than him. So the more honest you and I can be, the more truthful, the more we can connect with what is real, the greater our capacity to walk with him in intimacy. Tell yourself the truth. It's essential for telling anybody else the truth. So we're going to now, as a time of reflection, we're going to begin with a little bit of discussion. And then we're going to have a time of silence where I'm going to invite you to just be as brutally honest with Jesus as you possibly can. And then the worship team will be coming to guide us in a time of song. All right, here's your discussion prompt. And I'd like you to be in groups, please, of 2 or 3. All right? 2 or 3. Just in case it's unclear, 5 or 6 is more than 2 or 3. I'm making the groups small because I want you to have the opportunity for everybody to share in the next couple of minutes, all right? 2 or 3. Here it is, our discussion prompt around this encouragement to tell the truth. In your culture of origin, how encouraged were you to develop the discipline of emotional honesty? And you're like, oh, I do not want to throw anybody under the bus. If you need to, you can pass. But in your culture of origin, it may be a church, it may be your family, it may be the city you grew up in, the country you grew up in, whatever it happens to be. We'll keep that broad. How encouraged were you to develop the discipline of emotional honesty? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to interrupt you with a second question that you don't have to address. But I'll give you another question just in case you guys have more time to discuss, all right? First question, you got it? Go. The second question is on the screen. If you have already completed the first, you can go to the second. How do you discern between self-pity and telling yourself the truth? But again, feel free to just stay on the first question if you'd like. A few closing thoughts before we go into a time of worship. We began our teaching looking at the messy concept of a soul. And if you're leaving here with less clarity about a soul than you came in with, then bravo. It is not crisp, it is not clean. It somehow captures this glorious mystery that you are God's art and you are his dwelling place. That you are a uniquely custom-crafted soul that God breathed into existence. You exist by divine design. And let me reemphasize why that breath sometimes just lasts for days in the womb, and why that breath carries beyond a century. That is beyond us. But if life has begun, it has begun however long it lasts because God breathed. He breathed you into existence. You exist by divine design. We next looked at whether or not our definition of healthy was healthy. And we looked at Alfred of Einstein in his call to offer a healthy soul to Jesus as a way of saying thank you for his sacrifice. What? Alfred of Einstein rescuing us from soul care as a spiritualized form of narcissism, planting soul care right in the center of intimacy with God, nearness with God, love for God. I'm going to take care of the gift that he has given me. Then we looked at the challenge to tell ourselves the truth. We had to stare at Jesus in Matthew 26 and ask ourselves, do we think that a soul that describes itself as troubled and overwhelmed with sorrow, can such a soul be healthy? My answer is yes, because such a soul is telling itself the truth. We saw this example Jesus gave us of telling himself the truth about how he felt and telling himself the truth about what he believed. Would you please let this cup pass? But if it can't be accomplished in any other way, then I trust you. Your will be done. So now we come to a moment where we are invited to tell the truth. So I'm simply going to ask you, wherever you are, you can stay seated. If you feel like you'd like to make a place of prayer, you can kneel, you can come up to the front, whatever would be most comfortable for you. But we're going to follow Jesus' example, a fill-in-the-blank response. My soul is, be as honest as you can. Jesus' honesty there in Gethsemane filled in that blank with troubled, sorrowful, overwhelmed. My soul is. And as we bring our honesty to God, as we are as real as we possibly can, we take a giant step forward in the pursuit of a healthy soul. A giant step forward in intimacy with God. And let's say you're here tonight and you say, Alicia, but my story right now reflects more the first chunk of your life than the last chunk of your life. I'm not sure about God at all. I'm so glad that you're here. Bring your honesty. Maybe you want to phrase it a little different. God, I'm not sure you exist. But if you do, here's how I describe my soul right now. Bring your honesty with you. And know that God will take it all with an open heart, open arms. There is nothing you can say in these next few moments that are going to shock him or shame him or shut him down. Your honesty is the doorway to nearness with him. Amen? So in God's presence, I invite you for the next minute or two. God, my soul is, and fill in the blank.